Hello and welcome to the Visibility, Influence and Impact vlog and podcast. I'm your host, Jane Mackay from Jane Mackay Communications, marketing consultant and coach who works with people across the world to build the businesses that help them create their impact. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Leonie Akhidenor, a property developer, founder and host of the Parenthood Podcast, the founder of Elite Coaching, a coaching business supporting individuals, a business consultant and couples, and a part-time model. Welcome. What an intro, hey?
Thank you, Jane. It's great to be here.
You are a busy, busy woman. So we've just shared a tiny snippet of your story. Tell me about all the different things you do in your business world and how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, I think it all kicked off from parenthood, to be honest. I think prior to being a parent, I was actually both of my parents are migrants. I say mum was born in Oz, but at the age of 5 left for Greece. And then basically grew up in Greece. My dad is Nigerian and grew up there. So when they returned in their 20s to Australia, mum returned with dad. They were really trying to build a life for themselves. And I think, look, that context is important because I was the eldest, and coming from a family dynamic where, they were trying to build a business, financial security was not there. There was a lot of stresses around finance. And so the best thing I could do was to kind of be the good girl, get the grades. Academics was really important, and go to the uni and get the safe job. And so for a while there, I felt that was my path pretty much up until parenthood.
Yeah, it's that do the right thing, go and get a very safe job. It's a funny thing that entrepreneurship is still seen as quite an unsafe, risky thing to do.
Yes.
When, we're living, breathing examples that actually you can make it happen. But it's really interesting. So obviously you do a lot of different things, and parenthood was a bit of a trigger for that for you. What was the evolution from good girl getting the good grades and doing what we were expected to do to taking that risk and going out and building multiple income streams in your life?
Yeah, sure. So I think basically just prior to having children, I'd been a management consultant, in the big corporate for a while there, I guess, in talking marks, the safe option. And then I'd moved to property development. And that was actually the business that my parents started many moons ago. So I came back to Melbourne and started working, I guess, as an in-house consultant to the business. And so that was the safe sort of option. Up until that point, I felt like I had my identity straight. I knew that I'm the work hard, play hard kind of person. That was all going well. And then parenthood really spun everything on its head. It started for me during pregnancy. So I had prenatal depression, then I had postnatal depression. And it's amazing when mental health challenges come into play, how you start reevaluating your life. And what I realized from that experience was that, hold on, am I really doing what I love here, or am I doing what is expected of me? And by the time I actually had 2 children quite close together, they're 18 months apart. By the time I had my second, I again had depression during pregnancy, and afterwards I went, no, something's got to shift. I love my job and I love, the people that I surround myself with, but I'm not fueling that fire in me. And so basically 6 weeks after my second was born, I went, God, what can I do to shake things up? Because I'm feeling so miserable. It was COVID, it was just awful. We were in Melbourne, we're in lockdown for what felt like 25 years, and you just feel so isolated that really made me reevaluate my life. And I thought, you know what, I want to reach out to people, I want to connect, and I want to hear other stories of struggle so that I feel less alone in my struggle. I felt that there are some amazing parenting podcasts out there, a lot of which I felt I wanted more the stories versus, if you have this problem, let's get a psychologist on to talk about that. And I think that absolutely has a place. And I even do a bit of that with my podcast, but I love the stories. And that, and so for that reason, I actually decided, what better thing to do when you've just given birth and you're 6 weeks into your second
and
child than
podcasting, you don't have to leave the house.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Which
and
is
I
like
can connect with people. Yeah.
And
you know.
it's so being a new parent, to all the parents out there or not yet parents or planning to be parents, is really isolating. I just moved from Melbourne, 400 k's east, to a very small town. Luckily, my mum was out here, and by this stage, my sister, but because we all moved out here randomly. But I had severe postnatal depression as well. For that first sort of 12 months of my daughter's life. Thankfully, I didn't have it during pregnancy or with my son. But it is really isolating, and it's hard to know whether it's just you. And so that is your sort of raison d'etre for your podcast is very similar to my raison d'etre for my podcast, which is connecting with people and telling these stories, because I can tell you all the marketing tips in the world, but to the woman who's sitting out in the middle of whoop whoop like I am, going, well, it's all well and good for these women in the city to start a business, but what about me? What about, and so it's that whole, everything from the start all the way through, all the messy middle. We're not just showing the Instagram shiny parenting and business worlds. We're showing everything through our podcast and through our stories, and people are natural storytellers. We relate to that. So that's really interesting. So, how old are your kids now?
So I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Oof.
Yeah. And the thick of it, nearly 3-year-old, actually. He's a month off from being 3. So the podcast, basically is almost 3 years old, I guess, as well. So
it's I don't envy you. People think 2's bad. Yeah.
How old's your?
My baby's 9th birthday today.
Oh.
And I've got a 12-year-old daughter who's almost 13.
Wow.
So I'm at the other end of the fun. Just looking it straight down the barrel. So how do you manage your time around 2 very small children? Like, let's not pretend that 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds are not extremely demanding, way more demanding than newborns. Because when you've got a newborn, people don't expect you to be doing all the things and coming to the events and taking your kids to soccer and ballet and blah. But when they're older,
it's a different story, isn't it?
It is.
And they're not quite at the independent age either, right? Where they're just dressing themselves and getting themselves ready. I don't know if they ever get there, but
they do. They do. I like the parenting milestones we should actually celebrate is when they can wipe their own bums, put on their own clothes, find their own socks, put on their own seat belts and clean themselves. And swimming pool lessons without you in the swimming lessons without you.
Game changer.
Totally. Seatbelts, another game changer.
Yeah. Those bloody car seats, honestly. So look, to your point, so back to I'd started this podcast. Okay, great. Let's kick it off. Let's start meeting people. And it actually really helped heal me. And then I realized, wow, I'm finally using a passion that, I grew up doing drama. I never used, my drama skills as a management consultant, and I'm sure there are skill sets there that, are transferable as far as, public speaking and things go. But I was finally like, yes, I'm able to really use that skill set. So from that, and that was good because I could juggle it with the kids and organize my, interviews around the children, which was fantastic. And then I was like, cool. And so now what? And then what actually ended up presenting itself is some opportunities to work with a few brands and collaborate with them. So I did a few campaigns with a few brands. I did a Bonds one, a Kmart one, or whatever. And then someone was like, you should get an agent. And I was like, I don't know if I've got time to do the modeling and I've still got my day job and then the podcast, but the podcast, as you know, is ad hoc and you can work it around your schedule. So and then someone said to me, oh, no, the modeling work is ad hoc as well. It's literally every now and then you'll attend a shoot, but if you have a level of flexibility in your work, it's worth giving it a crack. So I was like, great, let's give that a red hot. Add that to the list because I had spent so long in my entire life trying to rationalize my decisions and ensuring that they all seemed relatively commercial if I was going to take it, I wasn't going to spend my time on something that wasn't necessarily going to make me money. And all of a sudden this podcast, I mean, it wasn't making me $1, but I loved it. And it's all I needed to go, okay, I can do this. And the modeling thing, I wasn't sure if I would book any jobs, but I was like, you know what? I said yes to the podcast. Let's do this modeling thing. And through that, opportunities presented in the other areas that you mentioned. So to your point, how do you juggle it all? I think it's important. You need that sort of, you do need the support as far as obviously childcare. So my kid goes to childcare, my other one goes to early learning. They're there 4 days a week, right? And so you need that. I think prior to that, I was struggling a little bit, but again, it was just podcasts. So I was able to do evening interviews and things like that. So look, I feel fortunate, and I understand a lot of people out there perhaps can't afford childcare or it's not within their means. And, and to those people, I say, I certainly don't take, it is a privilege in which I was able to afford it. However, if you are in sitting in that going, well, I have to look after my kids and I'd love to start, I don't know, a podcast or whatever it is, something that you're really passionate about, try to find those nuggets of time. Maybe it's a Saturday morning, if you're fortunate enough to have a partner, where your partner can look after the kids for an hour so you can go off and do the painting or do the podcast or whatever, but just at little bits frequently. I don't know, Jane, if you also agree, but if you just start somewhere and get a level of frequency up, it's a good place to start.
Yeah. 1% better every day, in 3 months, it's 100% better, 100 steps towards your goal. And I have had my business through having 2 children. I had 7 days off when I had my son because I actually realized one of the things that had contributed to having postnatal depression was actually not working, because work is really, really important to me. It's not to everybody. Totally get it. We all do what we need to do. But to me, it's a really big part of identity, because you were speaking about your identity earlier. What I've realized is the parts of our identity, especially as women, that are important to us are the things we need to treasure once we have children, because they're the things that get lost really, really fast. So yeah, I had 7 days off. I love my work. It brings me great joy. I'm always really happy to be sitting here, which is a really strange thing to say, but find those little pockets when the child is napping, if they're that little, or, when they're playing happily, have a notebook handy, or, you don't want to be sitting there on your phone, but have an iPad, have a laptop, have some way to just go, this is the progress I want to make. This is what it looks like. This is where I want to end up. Okay, where I am right now, appreciate that. How am I going to take the next step? The next intentional, aligned step towards your goal.
And I think the strongest and such a fundamental word there, intentional. So you've identified what that goal is. Okay, how are we going to get there? So for ages, I was listening to podcasts, for example, going, I reckon I could do that. But I had my sister, actually, she started a podcast. She's now got a podcast production agency, and but she's 6 years younger than me, right?
Sisters.
Sisters. But, and she kicked all of that off straight out of uni, and all she did was
millennials, man.
No family, no kids, no other job. And so I looked at her and I said, well, I can't just drop everything to do this podcast thing. It's going to be too hard. Forget it. I'm just going to do my day job. And that's what it was for ages. I can't quit my job to do a podcast. And this is where I think people, perhaps get it wrong. And I certainly got it wrong too. You don't need to quit your day job to have the next thing. It's really, as you said, being intentional about what those goals are, and perhaps being a little bit more intentional around your schedule too. I mean, I'm a self-professed recovering perfectionist, and I'm very organized, and so hence why I think, newborn life was just chaos for me, because I couldn't be organized. There is no structure.
Without being able to plan, I was freaking out.
Yes.
The unpredictable nature of having babies really messes with our very organized minds, especially those of us who do tend towards perfectionism.
Yeah.
Oh, it was like all the control is taken away.
Oh, Yeah. And there's no wonder why they do say the type A's tend to have a little bit more of a tendency towards that struggle when they've just given birth, etc. So, but I was trying to be as intentional as I could around my schedule, knowing that, i.e., like you said, if there was a bit of, and this wasn't the first, for the first child, I couldn't have done it. There's no way at 6 weeks after having my first child, I could have started a podcast. But by the second, you're kind of like, I know what I'm in for. And for me, it made sense. And again, to your point, it was a mental health requirement that I did something outside of being a mum, and that was important to me. But yes, being intentional around your time, I think, is fundamental. You don't need massive windows of time to just start.
It's amazing what mums can get done in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
It's incredible. So what does a great day in the office look like for you? What's the fun stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I feel like it does change a fair bit depending on what's going on. So I guess even if you're looking at it from a week perspective. So even this week, I've got one of my days, I'm doing a shoot, a homeware shoot for Kmart, which I'm really excited about. So I get to be a bit more creative and fun and all of that, and be able to sort of tick that box from that part of, the is it the left side of your brain that's a little bit, what's the one that's not so analytical?
They cross over and that always confuses me anyway.
So, a day like that, and then, I might have a coaching session. I've got a couple of couples that I work with, and that stems from the podcast, because what I ended up doing was I started this podcast and I go, okay, there's a lot of mum content out there. And I did actually start from the mum's perspective, and we were called Mum Life for about, 8 episodes. And then I went, the more stories I was hearing from the mum's perspective, I went, hold on, there's a missing piece here. I want to hear from the partner. What is the partner thinking when the mum's thinking, I'm resenting you for walking out the door and going to your job as I sit here with a newborn because I just want 5 minutes to myself? What's that partner thinking as they walk out the door? And so then I shifted to parenthood, and now the realm is looking at, if they are in a couple, both people's perspectives. And even now we'll have audience members call in, mums and dads. I try to keep it as heavily evenly weighted between the two, because I don't feel dads have as much of a voice and as much of a community. And I think that's certainly growing, and I think that's fantastic. But I really didn't want to lean too heavily on either side. So because of that, I was bringing couples on, and I was chatting away to couples, and I was like, wow, the dynamic and everything, it's really interesting. So I went off and did a bit of education in the coaching space, and now work with couples in essentially from a coaching perspective. And I love that. So that might only be, I don't know, a couple of hours a week scattered through my workload. And then other time, with my property stuff, I've got a level of flexibility where I might start quite early. I wake up at 5 a.m, so I might smash out a couple of hours then off I go, drop the kids off. And then so the point is, it's very fluid. And I think, again, fortunate in that, particularly from the job that puts bread and butter on the table, my property development work, I do have a level of flexibility there. And I absolutely appreciate it. People who perhaps don't have that flexibility in their work. But one thing I will say, and I heard this from a podcast recently, for those who might be sitting in a 9-to-5 corporate job and wanting to do something outside of that for themselves, really cool to remember that, yes, there will be demanding times within your job, but then there often will be periods where it's a little quieter. And it's in those sort of periods that you want to remember what your other goal is, which is, perhaps another initiative that you're wanting to kick off, and, leaving smack bang on 5 if you can, and racing off to do an hour of whatever, your initiative or whatever it is, but just not losing yourself in the one job that is putting bread on the table and forgetting your other goals. I don't know, like, Jane, what would you say about getting that balance right?
Well, see, I started my business just sort of on a whim, as we also moved to the country on a whim. And then I got poached because I'd come from corporate marketing in Melbourne to out here. There's not many of us out here. Well, there's 2 of us who are professional marketers. So they were like, we want you, come and do this job. And then, as you say, quiet period, I started a blog. And then people would read my blog and go, can you write for me? Because I was a copywriter first. Can you come and write for me? Blah, blah, blah. So that's how that business started. And it was literally in my lunch hour. That's when it started. But then it escalated, got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was working from 5 a.m. till sort of 8, this is pre-kids, in the morning on my business. And then when I got home till late at night on my business and working 9 to 5 in between. And I said to my husband, something's got to give. So that's when I ended up just going out by myself and just making the business happen. It's something that I see so many people trying to get everything lined up, everything perfect before launching. But until you've actually got some customers, got some runs on the board, as they say, to use a sporting analogy, which I've never played sport in my life, you don't actually know what your customers want. Until you start having those conversations with customers, you're not going to know what they want. You're not going to know what they need, or you're not going to hear about their language. So start with one really small thing that solves a problem and you're away. But also check your contract to make sure you're legally allowed. Very important.
Very important. And I like that point. And I think about when I started coaching, and the good thing is I can turn it up or turn it down depending on my workload in the other areas. But often I thought, oh God, well, I'm going to have to go get a website now. And but I don't know if that's not going to be my full-time job, but I'd like to just have that running alongside a few things. And if I did a couple of, 3 hours a week, call it, and I could do it, during lunch break or quiet times, and great. But God, okay, so am I going to have to invest in website? Am I going to do social media? Branding, like how far do you go? I mocked up this one flyer. I didn't mock it up. I did a rough draft, gave it to someone, spent $200 on it. It was a 1-pager in PDF. This is my coaching, and this is what I'm going to, you're going to get.
What you can do.
This is it. Emailed it across to a couple of people who I thought might be interested, and bang, we're in business. So I guess the common misconception there, and to your point, is that it doesn't have to be this massive thing. It's just get out there with your 1-pager or whatever that looks like.
With your Canva website.
Right. And start. I don't even have Instagram for my coaching yet. Like, I just haven't bothered, because for me also, unlike yourself, this was never going to be a sort of with yourself with the business and the marketing and all of that. I don't see myself going out to be a coach full-time anytime soon. So that flyer was sufficient. I don't have social media or anything like that. However, you can slowly grow that if that's what you want.
And you can turn it up and down because you're in control. I'll often have clients and there is a wait list, and I say to them, well, you've got to wait until July to work with me. And they're like, that's fine. That's cool. But, in the meantime, do this.
Yes.
And don't let them go, a week without hearing from you. It's sort of a really easy, low maintenance way to maintain that contact, but also have a more steady cash flow. If you've got a wait list, you're never going to run out of clients.
Do you find, how does the wait list go? Do you find, will anyone drop off if you say,
I think sort of with the business work that I do, it's very much, there's a sort of a combination of the skills and the personality with my specific way that I work with clients. So often if they get to me and I go, there's a wait list, they go, yeah, that's cool. But, if that gives me a bit more time to, get my money together or get my business sorted or get my ideas down. I don't, once people get to the stage of saying yes to work with me, I don't really have any drop off.
Yeah, it's amazing. It says shows what a strong brand you've created as well, which is amazing.
Which is just me being my weird kooky self. But that people like that. People come to me and go, I just binged all of your reels on Instagram and I think we will have fun.
Yeah, authenticity.
Okay, that's good because I like to have fun. There's a lot of laughter in my calls. So what does being visible in your business? You talk about not having any social for your coaching side, but obviously the Parenthood Podcast requires you to be visible. How do you do that? How do you do that in an authentic way? Speaking of authenticity.
Yeah, look, it is. I don't know if you've found the same thing, but I found it really tough. I found it so much easier to put myself behind, away from social media, and let's put up all interesting parenting content on my Instagram. And then eventually people were like, mate, you're the host. Like, we need to see you. We need to see your life. We need to see your personality. You put yourself forward. And I really struggled with that. And I think it was a limiting belief that I had around but no one no one cares. You know, they don't want to see you doing grocery shopping with your kids and whacking that up on stories. Or also, isn't that like a bit much if you're always posting about yourself? I mean, what does that say about, you know, are you really like, yeah, I just had all these weird beliefs around no one will care, and also I don't want to seem too much and all these things. But what I realized was, given the encouragement from others, people do want to see the person behind the brand. That is almost, to your point, what they're buying. They're buying you, your kooky personality, and everything in between. And similarly with brands, right? I mean, my consumers are, you know, my amazing audience, but fundamentally from a business perspective, I need brands to want to work with me, and so they need to know who Leonie Akhidenor is. So yeah, I really struggled initially. Now I do have a bit of help. I can't say that it's all me. So I do have someone who's a bit of a social media whiz and really supports me in getting the content planned out. But once a week, I'll put up a post that I've put up about my life and myself, which is very real time, because I just felt, I felt it was very inauthentic for me to just plan all this personal content for the next month when, like, you know, ahead of time, it just didn't, for me, that didn't vibe. I wanted to seem as authentic as possible, and so I give myself a window of opportunity to do that on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I'm the same, you know, and I manage socials for a few clients still, and I can't do the 4 weeks ahead. I sit there at swimming lessons with my noise cancelling headphones on, planning my content for the week.
Yeah.
And if you ever see me at swimming lessons on my iPad, that's what I'm doing. So you talked about showing up as yourself and how that can be a real challenge, especially as mums. I mean, my house is a shambles at the best of times. We live in a small house. My husband and I both work here. Our entire lives are in this house. So it's about showing up authentically as you, but also you don't have to share too much of your own personal life on socials. People think they're going to get on socials and you say, I'm going to share going to the supermarket, but you know, you don't have to share all of you. So we have permission to just show a part of our lives in our businesses. You don't have to show all of your life. Well, yeah. So it's very interesting that you say you're happy to show up authentically, but you know, it's gated.
Yes. I think, though, what resonates with people very much these days is that level of vulnerability and, you know, putting forward the struggle and all of that too. So absolutely, to your point, you don't have to give everyone everything. I am kind of very mindful around, okay, well, what is that struggle, or what is that, you know, that thing that I'm struggling with at the moment, and I want to somehow craft that into my post so that people feel less alone. Because I think, and you would probably agree, that now the movement in social media has moved away from the picture perfect, you know, my life is fantabulous, to a more authentic, like, oh wow, I'm struggling with this, oh me too, and people can comment on that, and they're really getting I think that's where the engagement level tends to come up. I saw the other day on the Darling Sunshine podcast, which is quite a well-known one of their hosts was in tears, and, you know, speaking to the camera, just being like, you know, and the caption was, this is the moment that I found out that I had miscarried again. And if you swipe, there's another perfect image of her and her husband on the front of a magazine, and she goes, and then I had to do this photo shoot. And just my heart sunk. And like, that's what I mean by that vulnerability. She gave you a nugget of something very intimate for her. Thousands of comments, and, you know, because people are like, and then so many people, me too, oh, I feel like, you know, you understand me. Other
1 in 4,
or just people being like, wow, like, you know, how are you okay? So yeah, it's very powerful if you do want to drop a little bit of struggle, I've found, in amongst the, you know, the content that you're willing to share.
And I mean, I say that you can, well, people feel that they have to share all of, like, I rarely share my children, for example. Right. They're not relevant to my business, but they're a part of my life that doesn't get shared much on social. Yes. People don't need to know about them, but at the same time, they're obviously a huge part of my life. Yes. But you don't have to share every little detail, what you ate for dinner. Please don't share what you ate for dinner. That's very 2000 and something. Anyway, but the vulnerability is what people do engage with, because they can self-identify with your struggle and that empathy that we have for each other, because that's actually what we like. Well, that's what we engage with each other as humans, is we empathize with experiences and emotional experiences. Like, I've never held back that I had P&D, and I've never held back on whatever struggles I'm going through. Like, my life has been nuts in the last 6 months. But if you have had, if you've struggled with mental health and you don't want to share that, you don't have to.
Yeah.
But I once had a very powerful conversation on this podcast, and the lady who I was speaking with, we said, as the elder generation now, it's actually our responsibility to have these conversations, to let the younger women know that, that this was deep in the Me Too movement, or that it's not okay. So we had that really powerful conversation. So anyway, it's about our responsibility of sharing our vulnerabilities to help other people who are struggling. And that's with the power of stories.
Oh, 100%. And to your point, being intentional perhaps around what you're wanting to share and what you're not. And then the items that you are, then, driving that message home. And that, that's similar to yourself. I speak a lot about, I have anxiety that sort of always fizzles along the surface for me. I'm very open about that because, and my struggles with depression and things like that. And I feel I need to talk about it, firstly, to normalize it for other people, but also secondly, when people hear me, for example, on the podcast or see me doing things in a campaign or something, there's a perception that, oh, she's so confident and she's this and that. And it's like, no, honey, I'm just as completely messed up as the rest of us,
Honestly,
I'm happy to own it.
Oh my God. My anxiety was so bad this morning. I said to my husband, I've got this podcast and I don't know if I've got it in me today. And he's like, well, I'm sure she'll understand. I'm like, it's okay. Just go and slap my face on, give myself a pump up, film a few reels for the week and go, okay, I'm here.
I'm back.
I'm back, baby. But it's hard,
It is hard, but then you find that when you push yourself and you're in this situation, often then you'll leave feeling more energized, right? Yeah. It's just getting there.
I'll be really happy after this. I love doing my podcast. Yeah. I love speaking, but it's really funny because people assume the same of me. They think I'm confident and extroverted. I'm not. I can only do one podcast a week because I'm like exhausted. But I used to get really sick with nerves before doing these, but now I'm quite used to it. So it's fun.
So once again, no one probably talks about that, with the
podcasting.
There's a lot in it.
I used to lay awake at night before every podcast freaking out.
Did you?
Yes. Yeah. That's something I probably haven't shared. I probably should talk about that on this podcast. Now I'm back. Yeah. My voice isn't quite back from COVID, but I'm back. So what I always talk about on this podcast, and which is part of the reason I started this podcast, was imposter syndrome. And what do you do about it? Does it exist in your world? How do you overcome the bad days in business and respond to the bad days in business?
Yeah, I think it's such a great one. And again, talking about being authentic about how we really feel. I mean, I feel that a lot. It's the most recent memory. I remember I was at my agent's office. We were doing sort of like a how to be a model kind of workshop, and there were 3 other girls there in their early 20s, fabulous, probably done way more selfies in their time than I have, and then we had the photographers there, and then we had this top model there. And so she's like, this is what you do, and you turn to the light and you put pose, and I was like watching her going, oh my gosh, and looking at these youngins going, oh my gosh, why am I here? This is I'm so out of my depth. And then each person got to go up and have their turn in front of the camera. So the 20-year-olds get up there and boom, boom, boom. And they look fabulous. And then they're like, cool, last one is Leonie. Off you go. Show us what you've got. So everyone on the room is watching me. And I'm like, and the more people are watching me and the more people, the more in my shell I got. So initially I was smiling. They're like, yeah, less smile, less, just less smile. And I was like, okay, now I'm overthinking this. And why am I here and I shouldn't even have an agent and I shouldn't do this, and whose idea was this, and how am I ever, I want to run away. And so, but then I remember getting home to hubby and I said, I don't know if I want to be a model anymore. And this was right at the start of my short-lived career. I haven't done it for very long. And he goes, oh, so why is that? And I said, well, because I went up there for like 30 seconds and I was really bad at it and everyone else was really good. And I just felt, this imposter syndrome. And he said, so you reckon after 30 seconds, you're going to be perfect at it? And I was like, well, I mean, he's like, do you reckon that's how all these models do it? After 30 seconds, they're just born that way, are they? They know how to pose in front of a camera. You don't think that, yeah.
The voice of reason.
Yeah.
I don't want reason.
Yeah.
I want a hug.
Exactly. You don't think they've practiced, and I'm there going, oh, okay, yeah, maybe, okay, I'll give it a go. I get, okay, and back in my shell I go. But to your point, we always have these moments. Maybe it's someone standing up in front of, doing the presentation, yourself doing your podcast and feeling hesitant towards it, and I think, and it's so normal and so natural. But I think, the more we can talk about it and go, yeah, that was really shitty, but I'm going to show up. I'm going to fake it till I make it. That's the attitude I always sort of have. And so, yes,
put a smile on. I'm here. I'm fine. I'm fine. So what does influence mean for you in your business? This is a really interesting question at this specific time in our milieu.
Yes, absolutely. Look, I think influence for me is really about making people, if people feel less alone in their struggles, essentially that's my mission from a parenthood perspective, for the podcast. I've been able to have a level of influence in them understanding that that's sort of normal and that we're all that way. Then, I feel like that's my job done, as far as, that's success for me, feeling like I can help improve the way in which other people feel about themselves and their lives. So look, I think, if I could be influential in that space, then that is influence. I'm curious. Well, what about yourself? I'm going to throw that one back at you.
Oh, that was cruel. For me, I see, my influence as being a very, a pretty low-key woman in a very small country town in Australia, saying, you know what, if you have a vision, I'm going to be the one that can show you that you can achieve that. I'm going to go, you can't be what you can't see. So entrepreneurship isn't just left to people in cities or white men in suits or people who can show up on Shark Tank. If you've got a really great idea and you're solving problems with people and you've got an idea to monetize that, then you can do it literally from anywhere with an internet connection, which is pretty much everywhere now. So that's sort of my influence is, and it's okay. It's okay to have fun while you do it. Because I spoke about, I can't remember if I've spoken about this or I'm planning to speak about it, oh yes, I have spoken about it on my Instagram. People have a fear of who they need to become to be successful. Am I going to have to change? Will my values have to change? And our values are such a core part of our identity, to come back to identity, that to try and change those is really, really destabilizes us as humans. So this is where you were talking about having irrelevant qualifications earlier. This is where my psychology undergrad comes in handy. And sociology, if we are put in a position where we feel we might have to change our values, change our beliefs, change who we are as people, change our identity, that just feels really terrifying. But this is to say that you're sitting there just as you, and I'm sitting here just as me. You don't have to change who you are to start a business. You don't have to suddenly have to start being a hustler or working 16 hours a day and sacrificing time for your kids. We start our business for the opposite reason. More freedom, more time, more flexibility, more money, and that control that you have when you have your own business. But that's what influence means to me. Anyone can do it.
Yes, great.
Yeah. So what does having impact, was your impact, you talk about your vision, your mission, or you talk about your mission. What does your impact, having an impact, mean to you?
So similar sort of thing, in that if with every podcast episode, with every reel, with every, thing, that every time I put myself out there to make parents feel less alone in their struggles or normalize experiences that they're having, I feel I'm making an impact on each, of their lives, essentially. So yeah, impact for me, I really think is feeling, and particularly as my audience grows and as our, audience grow, having impact on more and more people is essentially why I do what I do, right? Yeah. I think I started off saying that initially the podcast, wasn't sort of making any money from it. It's purpose driven. That's why I did it initially. And then you sort of get to a point where you're like, oh, I am putting a lot of time and energy and free content out there. And how can we be a bit smarter about doing things? But also, I had enough episodes under my belt to sort of justify working with brands and things like that too, because they look for that. So I think for anyone going out and, to do a podcast or whatever it looks like for you, probably understand that the first little bit, it's got to be fueled by your passion until
a lot of energy
and a little bit of capital that you might have to throw at it and all those things. But you need to know what your drive is and what impact you want to make, to your point, and what type of influence you want to have and all of those things. That's what's going to get you up out of bed every morning. And particularly when you will see others. I mean, I think another really interesting conversation is envy and comparison. So often I would, go on social media, putting up my post or whatever, and then I'd see other podcasters, for example, with their posts and their 3,000 comments underneath. And I'd go, why am I bothering? Why? They don't care about, no one cares about me. Look, there's already podcasters out there. Why do they want to hear from little old me over here? And maybe I should just forget about the whole thing. And we all have days like that, right? So then it comes back to, own those times. And I'm not saying, dismiss that. Like, it is what it is. You'll feel those things and you'll go, okay, and maybe it's just a shitty hour for you, and then you can bounce back. Or some people, it's a shitty day, and then the next day they're like, right, let's do it. Let's get back into battle. But owning those moments, but certainly understanding that you'll always fall back on that passion that you've got to keep you going, and longevity is everything. And I think there was this quote that I loved where it's like, you can't compare someone's chapter 20 to your chapter 1. So here I am looking at little old miss with a podcast that she's had for 5 years, and I'm 3 months in, and I'm like, why aren't I getting the same traction? You can't compare, right? I mean, you'd probably, Jane, you see the same thing in the business world.
In marketing. And there are some very flashy, very successful marketers out there. And I go, well, who wants to listen to me? Plenty of people do, because we're relatable. It's also, don't forget that to someone else, you're their chapter 10. People, I had a message. Actually, it was on a comment on a post the other day going, did you know that you're one of the reasons I keep going? Because I look at you, and she's a country woman. I look at you and I know that if you just keep going, and that's the impact. It's that we are here to be examples to people who are just that little bit behind us. We don't have to be up there in the stratosphere of podcasting. We can just be here telling our stories, and however many thousand or 100 people that listen to this podcast will be impacted by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing you said there, which is so true, it comes back that being relatable is so important. I realized that because I remember initially when I was doing podcasts, I was like, I need to sound a certain way, not even need to sound a certain way, but I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to, and I was very kind of like, this is my forum to, and probably a bit stiff as often we can be when we're kicking off something. Right. And then I remember listening to this other property podcast that I listened to, and there are 2 hosts, and one of them is a migrant Greek guy who's doing very well in the property industry. And he's kind of like, yeah, my name is this, and this, and this, and this. And then the other guy probably sounds very well versed. I was always hanging to hear what, his name's Tom, the Greek guy, had to say, because I was like, I just love that he's a little bit, rough and tumble, and he's got his accent, and I love that. And he was being authentically himself, and I was more keen to listen to him than the guy who was polished, and And then I realized after listening to that, God, I've got to just be myself. I don't have to be like, welcome to the podcast today. Again, being the person I thought I had to be in this position. People don't care about that. They resonate with your authentic self, to your point.
They do. They really do. And I get messages because I used to, before I would do a podcast, go, I'm invariably going to say something really awkward because that's just my personality, because it's weirdly shy. So I get really awkward, but I'm not like that anymore. I've done this too many times now, and I've made too many friends through this podcast. But what people don't realize also about the podcast is I don't meet any of the people I speak to before I speak to them. Like, this is literally our first conversation. So, which actually brings me to my next point, which is, what are your tips for all people out there about getting fearlessly visible in your business and doing really scary stuff?
Yeah. Oh gosh. It's certainly for me, as I said, wasn't instinctive. And I think for most people, unless you're used to being out there because of your profession or however it looks like, for example, I think of my, peers in the modeling world, they need to, they've got cameras pointing at them all the time. So then social media was easy for them, and being visible was easier than it would be for someone like myself. So I guess tips are, firstly, just get over yourself, because I had to tell myself that too. I think we are more worried about how we perceive ourselves than anyone else really is. They don't care. They're like,
they really don't.
They don't. Everyone's too busy worrying about themselves. So that was a really good kind of mindset shift for me. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves that, we're not that special. Or, if you stuff up, people will probably like that more. So I, as an example, I would edit my podcast fiercely, because I was like, oh, I don't like that. No, that sounded too, long-winded, etc. And now I keep all my stuff ups in there.
I don't edit.
Right. There you go. So people love that, because they want to hear you trip up, or they want to see the photo of you that, you're like, oh, it's not a perfect photo, but people want to see that. So I think, certainly I think a mindset shift is a great place to start. That certainly helps me. But then just remembering that the more authentic you come across, the more you'll likely resonate with people.
The more memorable you are. Because if you look like everyone else, you don't stand out.
Yes.
And it's not helping your brand at all.
No.
What an incredible conversation. Thank you, Leonie. How can people find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, great. So I'm most visible on Instagram. So feel free to join me at Parenthood Pod. So it's POD pod. And that's probably the best way to connect with me.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you so much, Leonie.
Thank you.